Greetings and a good evening. Let's go over some texturing tips. Kowalski showed the tips in this video for impatient people. Now let's get going. Color ramps have many uses. If you use one for colors, you can import an image, like this, into Blender. Grab the eyedropper tool and just drag it across the image to get the full color spectrum. Here are some versions of the same wood texture that use different color ramps with the source images. Do mind the direction of your dragging. Another use for color ramps is to control contrasts and masks, like on this sphere here. But outside of just the vector of the color ramp, you can't really automate it or control it from outside of the group node. By making the following node group, you can make a more controllable version. Let's have old-timey TV at Klaus explain this to you.
Hello one and all, come on down to Klaus's node group emporium. Today I will show you this ramp node. As you can see, it gives the same output as our old friend the color ramp. On the color ramp I can move this little black flag to change the contrast. By using the multiply value on the ramp node I can achieve the same thing. It's basically like moving both of the flags of the color ramp at once. So if you look closely, you will notice that the contrast is actually different. This can be fixed with a little contrast value. Furthermore, we have the min value to change the amount of black and how dark it is, or light. And the max value to change the brightness of the, well, bright parts. Now I don't do this for just any customer, but let's have a look down the hood, shall we? It's just an add node and a map range node. This makes the map range node act more like the color ramp and more user friendly. Thanks for joining me here today and I hope to see you next time.
Okay, next up, as stated in our Everything About Texture video, I recommend getting some group node assets, like untiling nodes, noise packs, and stuff like that for material creation, as they can drastically speed up the process. Let's take these two rock textures here. Let's look at the node trees for them as well. As you can see, by using a noise pack, you can make a complex material like this rather quickly. And in this case, I personally find it even looks better than the other one. Oh, this is the noise pack that I used, it's free. Then, if you make a material, or follow a tutorial to do so, I would recommend turning them into a group node. You can press Ctrl G to do so, after selecting them of course. Some tutorial channels, like Ryan King, already does this in his tutorials, but I would change some things. First, leave the texture coordinate node on the outside, as this is gonna be the first thing you change out if a material does something weird on an object, so having easy access of that really helps. Second, try to think of what other controls you might want and add them in there. In this tile material from this tutorial, I added these controls here. I added some that couldn't have been added in the tutorial because I used a ramp node. And last but not least, add some extra outputs like color, roughness, normal, whatever else you think might be useful, so you can use this material node that you've made to make bigger and more complex materials down the road. Now that I'm on about tutorials, a lot of brick and plank tutorials leave out some pretty easy steps that make a very big difference. Take a look at the plank material on the floor to your left. It's from this tutorial. And the one on the right, I added 3 nodes to. If you look closely, you can see, well, obviously some color change. But if you really look closely, you can see the wood grain gets interrupted by the edges of the planks. You can do this on any material with a node output like this, with the different colors, like the brick texture, the Voronoi texture and some other ones. You just take the output of that and plug it into a white noise texture. You take the output of that and you just plug it into a white noise texture. Set that to 4D and use the value to affect the texture. I usually plug it into the W value. If you can't find it, try changing your texture node to 4D. You can also plug it into other things, obviously. And by using the color output of the white noise and plugging it into a hue saturation value node, you can get the color randomization that I mentioned. Right, those tips were a bit long. Let's go over 4 shorter tips. Here on the monkey, you can see a simple way to mask up-facing parts of an object. To, for example, put grass on hills and not on the sides of cliffs. If you look at the nodes here, you actually only need the bottom 3 nodes here to do that. By moving the color ramp, or ramp node if you prefer, you can change how steep a surface can be before it changes into the different color or material. The top 2 nodes here are to add the detail on the border, like this. The final mix node here should be a mix shader if you are mixing materials instead of colors. Keep that in mind. Here you can see a simple way to make your MPR, paint or toon shaders that you created by using the shader to RGB respond to the color of light. They don't normally do this. The material here is from this tutorial, though the tutorial doesn't actually have the changing colors because of the light thing. You only need these 3 nodes here. Make sure the mix RGB is set to screen. Here's a little demonstration of it working. And on this mushroom you can see a way to use image or painted textures with those paint textures. Depending on the image you will need to play with the settings. Here's the node setup. And here's me changing some of the sliders. Lastly, I want to point you to the random output of the object info node. If you have a bunch of copies of the same object in your scene, you can just plug that random output into the hue of a hue saturation value node to get a bunch of different colors of the same object. Or you could plug it into the W value of a noise texture, for example, and get scratches and like roughness changes on your object to be different on each copy. You can control the degree by which this changes by putting a color ramp in between. Or a map range. Or a ramp node if you prefer. I hope these tips were helpful, and I hope to see you next time.